Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call our Yuba City City Council meeting into session. It is 6:05. Before we get going, I just want to make a quick announcement. Most of you who are already uploaded with our emergency phone numbers probably already received this information, but I wanted to go ahead and read that we have an immediate release that the Yuba Center areas lift most of the evacuation orders. Residents are still encouraged to remain alert and be prepared. All evacuation orders are lifted for Yuba City, Live Oak, Marysville, Wheatland, Yuba County, and all portions of Sutter County except for the Meridian and Robbins Basins effective 6 p.m. today. Okay. Thank you. With that, can we go ahead and take roll call, please?
Mayor Cleveland, Vice Mayor Didball,
Here.
Councilmember Buckland,
Here.
Councilmember Cardoza,
Here.
Councilmember Harris.
Here.
At this time, we will have Councilmember Cardoza lead us in the invocation, and right after that, can we go ahead and have Councilmember Buckland lead us in the pledge tonight?
Dear Father, we seek blessings on the task before us this evening. Bless our efforts with clear insight, our deliberations with wisdom, our work with clarity and accuracy, and our decisions with impartiality. Finally, thank you for keeping our community safe. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
You salute with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. So we have a presentation presented by Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, the annual report.
Thank you, members of the council. As you may recall, annually, Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency makes a presentation on the what has happened in the past year and the challenges facing us in the upcoming year.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Can you let us know your name, please?
Yes. My name is Mikey, and I'm Executive Director of the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. Thank you. So rather than provide that briefing of what's happened last year, what we're planning on in the coming year, and given all the activity associated with the Oroville Dam incident, high water, and a lot of activity that I'm sure folks have been seeing around town and south of Yuba City, what I thought I'd do is provide an update on storm-related activities that SBUFCA is performing in support of other agencies, and the information as we know it, and that's of course that's very much a moving target and very dynamic situation, and some of those just for the benefit of the council and the public. And I'll touch upon how these things impact both the completed works of last year and some of the things we're planning next year. So with that, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about, and I'll be very brief in my comments about Oroville Dam. A lot of folks know more about Oroville Dam than I do. We're simply the recipients of all the water that comes out of Oroville Dam, and we're reacting just like everybody is, just like all local maintaining agencies and others are to incidents as we receive information from the Department of Water Resources and others at the Oroville Dam incident. But I want to talk specifically about how the things that happen in Oroville Dam impact the levee improvements we've been working on this past year and into the future and in the short term as well. I'll talk about some of the recent actions that we have been supporting or are constructing as a result of Oroville Dam, the Oroville Dam incident, and recent high water, some of the advanced measures, and some of the specific actions that are being taken within Yuba City limits. So let me just start out with and this, and I apologize if some of this is news, but this has direct impacts on some of the things that we're working on right now. So as most of you know, Oroville Dam, located on the Feather River, is the highest or tallest dam in North America when it was constructed. It was the jewel of the State Water Project, largest dam in North America when it was constructed, 770 feet high. The issues are associated with the emergency spillway and the service spillway. Those two structures are sort of the overflows in order to protect the dam embankment. Dam embankment is separated from these two service spillways by a large rock knoll. The service spillway is what most people see in operation as recently as 2010, 2006, 1997. You saw flows of up to 160,000 CFS coming out of it. And then the emergency spillway is essentially for the never, never flood. That's NOAA's flood, never to be used. The designers, when they put that thing up to handle 350,000 CFS, is obviously much more than the capacity that we'd like to see on the river. But it was designed that way, and spillways are typically designed that way in order to protect the embankment. And the embankment has no issues associated with it, but it is the structure that is protected by these very large, high-capacity spillways, the service spillway and the emergency spillway. Now, the key issue here that I'm going to be talking about that impacts us down here in the floodplain is that the service spillway has gates on it, so you can control how much water comes out of that, up to 150, 160,000 CFS. The emergency spillway, which protects the dam from ever overtopping, is uncontrolled. And for good reason. It's, again, for the never, never flood, and when it does operate and it goes uncontrolled, you're subject, or you're more subject to Mother Nature's operation of this reservoir as opposed to the service spillway, where you have some control over what releases are made. So the damage was located, you can't see it, but there's sort of a grade break right about here. The damage when the erosion started back in early part of February is located down here. It started walking up the spillway, and there was big concern that it was going to get up to the service spillway gates. These are the control structures that let water out, and that's how they meter how much water we see down here in the floodplain. When this started eroding, there was concern that the department would lose control of the service spillway gates, and that's when you saw some water, a relatively small amount of water, up to 12,000 CFS that went over the emergency spillway. Never before been operated before. So there was a big deal for the Department of Water Resources, and we all saw the outcome of that. Now that's significant because 12,000 CFS is a small fraction of the 350,000 CFS capacity of the emergency spillway. So, of course, we're paying a lot of attention to this, and our concern as being responsible for about 41 miles, 36 miles of constructed works is what does this mean for our systems and our safety of people living behind those levees, and is that if this starts operating more often, then we will be subject to Mother Nature, not the flood detention storage, which attenuates those floods so you don't see what Mother throws in at the upstream end of the reservoir. That's a big deal for us. So we've been paying close attention to that, and as the Department of Water Resources and others have reported, this spillway erosion has stopped right where it is. Now, nobody's actually seen if it's going to erode, but for right now there's a big rock knob here, competent rock, that keeps this erosion from happening. So our fear, of course, is that if things start moving up the service spillway, then somebody might that there will be a point where these gates have to be shut, and then we'll just be operating on the emergency spillway. And that's obviously concerning to us, because if we're subject to these flows in the reservoir without this service spillway, we could see high water levels, and those impact the safety of our levees, high water. So what are we doing about that? So when this came up, it was, of course, associated with all of this rain activity. Right now we're on track to seeing more water than we ever had in the Feather River watershed, approaching even that or surpassing of 1982-83, which I think was the water year of record. And so along with the high water, we saw a lot of levee distress in areas that had not been improved by the Feather River West Levee Project. And then the Oroville incident happened, and it became clear that our regulated flow coming through the service spillway may be adversely impacted, meaning that we may not have the full use of the reservoir. And so in support of our member agencies, by that I mean the state of California itself, Maintenance Area 3, and also Levee District 1, who operates and maintains many of the levees through Yuba City, we recommended and requested funding to take some advanced measures. This is a long way of saying that there are a lot of levees that are unprotected that SBUFCA does not have funding to fix right now, or we have not fixed them. Most of the Feather River West Levee project, 36 miles, has been completed, but there are areas that have not been completed yet. And so in the interest of public safety, we made a request for funding from the state to take some emergency actions in advance of high water, in advance of what we hope never happens, which would be that the service spillway becomes inoperable. And so some of those things I'm going to talk about. Now, just sort of a primer on what the Feather River West Levee project is. That's the project I've been reporting on for about 4 years now, that extends from Thermalito Afterbay in the north, 36 miles south to Star Bend, actually about 36, 37 miles south to Star Bend. That's the 200-year level of flood protection project. That's nearly complete. We'll wrap up that work this June. Completing about 4 years of construction. The areas I'm going to be talking about are the unprotected, or the areas that have not been improved by anybody, or at least recently, from roughly the end of the Star Bend setback levee south to the confluence with the Sutter Bypass. And then I'm going to talk about some seepage areas that you probably heard about within the limits of Yuba City itself. And these are adjacent to an existing relatively recent construction of a core slurry wall right in town. Okay, so a lot of the activity, and many of you may have seen this, is associated with what we call advanced measures. In other words, when we knew that high water was coming down the river, we knew that Oroville may have an issue regulating its service spillway discharge. We got together with our SBUFCA board, and the SBUFCA board, representing the city, Mr. Buckland, Mr. Cleveland sit on that board. Sutter County sits on that board. These have direct impacts in Sutter County and Yuba City and specifically. So the SBUFCA board made a recommendation to take these advanced measures ahead of any even the remote possibility of losing full capacity of the Oroville spillway, in addition to the levees distress that we'd been seeing just from the, quote, normal high water. And so this is the result of that. We had a emergency board meeting last week, and we were out rolling with trucks just a couple of days later. Now, we didn't do this, without some sort of assurance from our, quote, state partners to reimburse us, because the only way these things happen are with money. And of course, SBUFCA is well suited to do this, since we have construction crews on the ground. We're used to doing this kind of work. But we got a commitment from the state of California to make us whole when this is all over. And that's the only way these things happen. So the work that we're doing is located in 3 areas, and you're probably, if you haven't heard about it, I mean, we're getting, obviously, Kim Floyd, our public outreach person, is getting a lot of calls. We're getting a lot of calls about this, and you've probably seen the traffic on Highway 99. It consists of 3 areas that are located between Cypress Avenue, which is a few miles south of Star Bend, all the way down to Laurel Avenue, which is at the south end. And all of this work is associated with not slurry wall construction. It's a little late for that, but rock berm construction. And rock berms are nothing more than filter fabric, an engineered material topped with about 3 feet of rock and extending about 30 feet wide, measured this way. And so we've got 3 locations between Cypress Avenue and about a quarter mile south of Laurel Avenue that we're placing this rock. The rock serves to drain and remediate under seepage, which of course is also what our slurry walls do. It's just faster, less robust, and it's something that we can do in the rain. And so we've been working throughout all this rainy weather to do that. That work will be completed by Thursday, or well, probably Friday of this week. And then we'll pull the contractor off and wait for this thing to move out or for the next incident to happen. So that's what's happening between south of Star Bend all the way to the confluence, or all the way down to just south of Laurel Avenue, south of Yuba City. There are also some seepage areas in Yuba City that I alluded to earlier. Yuba City is an area, so you've probably seen Sabufka projects north and south of Yuba City. You may ask, well, why aren't you working in Yuba City? That's where everybody lives. Well, that's because there's an existing core slurry wall that was constructed in 1998, 99 timeframe. That work, if completed as designed, met all criteria for 200-year level of flood protection. And in Sabufka board meetings, we've made no secret that, well, we really don't know how it was constructed because we didn't get the as-built drawings. And as recently as 6 months ago, we identified some issues with that wall. And sure enough, the water comes up. The full-scale model test indicates there are some seepage areas. Now, that's a concern. Yuba City is much safer with that slurry wall that has been constructed by the Corps of Engineers relatively recently, 98, 99, than it would be without that. And the areas of distress are not nearly as bad as they were in 98, 99. Nonetheless, it's an area of concern, and not coincidentally, we had requested money from the state of California essentially to redo the Corps of Engineers work as recently as 2 months ago, not coincidentally. We're waiting to hear back from the Department of Water Resources on that work, but you will see some areas, and you'll see some trucks running around looking at these areas of seepage. And they're located beginning from the north to south at the old Gilsizer detention basin. We've been working with the city to take some proactive measures to remediate that seepage by raising the pool downstream of Gilsizer. We had some construction crews and supplied some material to backfill some areas of distress downstream of Gilsizer. And there's some sandbag rings at other locations at the end of Tea Garden Avenue and on Van Gelderen Way. This is the 10th Street Bridge, Calusa Avenue. So you'll see some activity here and at the end of Tea Garden to the south. Those aren't emergent issues. We're just watching them right now, and we've taken some measures along with the city to address any issues going forward. That's all I had, and I realize I threw a lot out there, but I'd be happy to respond to any questions from the council.
All right, bring it back to council. Are there any questions for Mike?
I have a few. So Mike, if we're looking at the prior work done by the Army Corps and having to get funding for that, what would be the time frame that those repairs could be done into the future, just roughly?
Well, so we put in a request through LD1. Let me just say something. These kinds of activities are outside of Sabufka's box. It's not what we do. Flood operations, right, and certainly not maintenance. This is what the local maintenance agencies do. The only reason we're doing this is because we have the expertise and the equipment, and we're right here, and we're just finishing up construction, so it was just a fit. So that request, in response to your question, has already gone up, and LD1 has put that forward to request that the Corps come in, take a look at this, and through the PL84 program, they can fix this. And in 1997, they did it within a year. Now, the product was not what we would like, but they can do that within a year's time. They could do this under the PL84 program, and they've demonstrated they can do this summer. We put in, Sabufka could do it too. So not coincidentally, when we found these issues, we put in for money a couple of months ago, and we could do that as well. So it could happen, in response to your question, it could happen very quickly. It could happen within this construction season, and that's what we would be shooting for.
So we talk about funding from state sources. Would there be any federal sources that might be available?
Oh, this would be federal
federally
money. Yeah.
Funded.
And then there's some limited state funding available for just these types of projects as well, and so we're obviously looking to utilize those. So it's a parallel track. We're seeking funding from both sources.
Right. Appreciate it. And at some point, try to get some sleep too, Mike, you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Mike, I do have a question as well.
Sure.
You indicated that when this work was done, this was back 1998, and it met the requirements back then. How have those requirements changed today, and how are we going to ensure that those requirements are up to par? Like we said earlier, that, you didn't really think that this was the best, but we moved forward in that area. But how do we ensure that it will be the best quality and move forward? And how do we make sure that we meet those requirements that are stronger today?
So that's
they
good.
were back
So that's a
then?
good question. And so when I say that the slurry wall was constructed according to then standards, and standards have changed over time, engineering standards are always changing. Nonetheless, many successful slurry walls have been constructed using those standards. So for example, this is an 18-inch soil cement bentonite wall. It's not important to know the details, but it's like this, right? Our slurry walls are like this. They're 3 foot wide. That's a measure of conservatism, but this wall is perfectly adequate. Many successful walls have been built to that width. They use different type of material. We use a different type of material for a slurry wall. Very successful walls have been built out of both. This is just the standard of care today. The materials we use are just the standard of care today. And so that's why we also had copies of their design and what the expiration information. If they had done everything as designed and had done everything according to the expirations, it was the feeling of our analysis that it would have met modern standards. We have an independent panel of experts. These are experts that have no stake in the game. They have no connection either with the community or our project, and they come in, we have a regular meeting, and they look at our stuff. And they said, well, that's a good decision. That's a good fiscal decision. But you didn't build it, so you don't know exactly how it is. And they recommended that we put instruments water side and land side of this. And that's how we determined that we had an issue last January when we had this very modest event. And that's how we identified and did the work. And that's how we came up with a cost estimate to do these things. But in response to your question, the way we ensure that we meet those standards is that obviously we would be to play a role in the PL 84 inspection rather than sort of leave it to the Corps to do, because we have a vested interest. It's not the Corps who would certify that for 200-year protection. It would be us. And so we would be much more in their business. The second thing, obviously, is that rather than leave it to the Corps, we could do it, right? The community could do it. By that I mean Yuba City could do it. And we would obviously feel a little bit more comfortable if we were in charge of the work.
Yeah, my concern was that since it was completed in 1998, obviously we've gone through years of drought, and now all of a sudden we have high waters. Pretty much, you look over the years when we had normal rains, we dealt with the regular waters, but since we had drought for so long, that now we all of a sudden have high waters and we're getting seepage. And so I just wanted to make sure, that whatever the requirements are, we up the ante and ensure that for future weather conditions, we are not having that seepage. Right now, it's clear. My understanding is the water is coming clear, but what happens as that water continues, that seepage continues, and it becomes dirty water, then what do we do?
Yeah, and I want to make it clear that it's not just the clear water. It is the fact that there is a substantial slurry wall in the ground. There are just some locations that we would construct differently today, and that's why we believe you're seeing that clear seepage at present time. So you're much safer today with that wall in the ground than without it. Any other questions?
Any other questions for that? I think I'm okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. I'm going to open it to public communication right now, so right after we do this. So for public communication, we are welcoming and encouraging participation in this meeting. Public comment is taken on items listed on the agenda when they are called. Public comment on items not listed on the agenda will be heard at this time. Comments on controversial items may be limited, and large groups are encouraged to select representatives to express the opinions of the group. Written requests. Members of the public submitting written requests at least 24 hours prior to the meeting will be normally allowed 5 minutes to speak. Appearance of interested citizens. Members of the public may address the City Council on items of interest that are within the city's jurisdiction. Individuals addressing general comments are encouraged to limit their statements to 3 minutes. So if you wish to speak, this is the time. Yes. Up there, please. Thank you, Chuck.
My name is Chuck Miller, and I live here in Yuba City with my wife. And of course, we're very aware of what's been going on at Orville. And Mike's comments regarding the service spillway. My question is, what is the status of that spillway at this point in time? I have seen pictures of the big hole in it, and they've been operating the spillway and putting substantial amount of water through there, and it hasn't collapsed totally yet. So I'm curious what the status of that service spillway is.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if Mike is able to answer that question.
So here, this is the caveat. I haven't been up to Orville Spillway. But I can report to you what I've been told through many of the same, through the same media and many of the same information venues that's available to the public. So I'll tell you what, and we have a regular call with the Department of Water Resources about reservoir operation plans for the future, and that's always reported out in the noon briefings. But obviously, we have a sort of a higher stake in this, and this includes, Yuba County Water Agency, Marysville Levee Commission, RD 784, Trilla, and so on, RD 1001, and we participate in a call every day. So I got a little bit of information, maybe to respond to that, and I don't think it's any different than what you've been hearing publicly, and it's that the service spillway is, quote, stable. So the erosion, I think, is encroached up to within about 1,600 feet from the gate, so it's quite a ways from the gates. If you go to I encourage you to go to the Facebook page for the Department of Water Resources. There's some extraordinary videos and photographs of the beehive of activity that's taking place on that rock knoll. There's tremendous amount of concrete grouted riprap that have been placed in the erosion rills downstream of the emergency spillway. It looks like much of the upper reaches of the emergency spillway have been grouted and riprapped. The service spillway looks pretty much as you've seen in many of these photographs, and it's remaining stable, relying on some competent bedrock in the service spillway to prevent any further erosion. So the biggest deal right now is a bunch of debris that sits at the bottom of the service spillway, and this is public information. There's something like 2 million yards of concrete and rock debris that washed out of the service spillway. I don't have the photograph up, but you'll note that the outlet, the low-level outlet for the Orville Dam, comes through the power plant, and it shares the same channel as the service spillway and the emergency spillway. So obviously, when the service spillway failed, all this debris ended up in the channel, preventing the discharge from the low-level outlet through the plant. So that's a big deal, because that's how you get water out of the bottom depths of the reservoir. When you take the service spillway out, you lose another sort of straw out of the reservoir to get water out of the reservoirs. So there's a lot of activity to remove, if not 2 million yards, a lot of that material to allow discharge, and particularly early discharge from the lower depths of the reservoir. So you've been hearing a lot about that. In addition to work on the emergency spillway, service spillway is stable. There's a lot of work to remove the debris out of the bottom of the channel discharging from the plant. So that's all I have on that. I would encourage you to take a look at the Facebook page, and the noon briefings are very useful that the Department of Water Resources has on a periodic basis.
Appreciate that, Mike. Mike, are your meetings, the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency meetings, open to the public for public to attend, or are those closed sessions?
These are pretty informal calls. When status changes, we get a call from the Department of Water Resources. They've been pretty good about letting downstream levee maintainers and downstream agencies like us know, and they just come up. We all get on the phone and say, hey, what's changed, and ask questions.
Okay.
And that's in addition to the usual public press briefings and the venues the department puts on.
Okay.
So they're kind of on an ad hoc basis.
Okay, just thought I'd ask just in case public is interested in participating. Thank you.
Madam Vice Mayor,
Yes.
over here. Given the timeliness of Mr. Inamine's presentation, to let you know, we did put this broadcaster meeting on Facebook Live. I know that some people attend from the beginning, some people don't, just to be able to restate to the public a couple things. One, that our levees are safe here along Yuba City. We're monitoring a few situations, but there is nothing imminent, as Mr. Inamine stated. And also for those people who would like regular updates, in addition to the DWR page, the City of Yuba City page and the County of Sutter also has information available that we've been updating daily, if not twice daily. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Okay, get my page back here. We have the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and can be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items prior to the time with City Council votes on the motion unless members of the City Council, staff, or public request any item be discussed or removed from the consent calendar for any individual action. So do we have action by City Council, or? No?
If nobody wants anything removed, I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay. We're all in slow mode as we're recovering from this long week. All right, for our general items then, we have an in-depth Yuba City economic and fiscal analysis presentation.
Good evening, Vice Mayor and members of the City Council. Thank you, Terrell. Finance hires consultants to provide periodic fiscal updates to City Council to keep them apprised of the city's financial activities and trend data compared to similar local agencies. An independent third-party economic and financial analysis will be provided to City Council by Russ Branson, former finance director with City of Roseville, and he's a principal within PFM Consulting Group. And I'd like to turn it over to Russ for this evening's presentation. I'll
Thank
be
you, Robin.
available to answer questions when he completes his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Robin.
Great. All right, thanks, Robin. Mayor, Council, it's good to be before you tonight, or Vice Mayor and Council. Good to be before you tonight. The presentation I have is shown here. It's an economic and financial analysis. And so as we go through it, there's really two sections. So first is there's kind of an economic context section, looking at broader as well as specific economic issues with the city, within the city. And then looking at the city's financial overview for your budget past and potential future budgets as well. So economic context, first is that, is really that part of the economic context is that our economy in general goes up and down over time with recessions and recoveries. We're now 92 months and counting into a recovery from what's been known as the Great Recession, which ended in June 2009. And just for some context, the average recovery since 1975 has been 58.4 months before another recession, with the longest being 120 months. And that was in the early 90s. So this is not to be predictive, right? We don't know when we're going to have some economic issues or recessions. It just says we're in a part of a cycle where we've had a long recovery, which is great, and hopefully it'll keep going on. But at some point, there's going to be a downturn that will impact the city in some fashion. Again, this is not a prediction of how it will be impacted. It depends on what the recession impacts in terms of sales, or the last recession really hit property taxes very hard. We'll talk a little about property values in Yuba City later. So that's just the context in a very broad sense of the city operates, businesses operate here in the context of the overall economy, and that overall economy does impact city revenues. Population of the city, Yuba City is the population center for Sutter County. And this actually the whole area with a population of about 68,000. So you've grown about 1.3% or 1.4% annually over the last 10 years, but about 0.5% annually over the last 5 years. So you're since 2010 to 2015, and so the growth has been slow since the end of the recession. And it was a little faster prior to that. So so you've been also operating in a time of slower growth and slow growth within the city, which impacts revenues as well. So we're going to turn a little more specifically to looking at Yuba City compared to some other jurisdictions in terms of economic factors as well as revenues and expenses per capita. And what we've chosen to do that with, because you're oftentimes not oftentimes, for the city, your biggest general fund expense are salaries and benefits. You have to look at, are you setting salaries and benefits right? And that's the biggest expense in your budget. So we're looking at comparable cities are those where the city compares salary and benefits for its bargaining groups when looking at labor negotiations. So those are Chico, Lodi, Rockland, Turlock, West Sacramento, and Woodland. So if those seem random to people of why do we chose those 6, they're because those are comparable jurisdictions for cities' labor negotiations. And first off, just Yuba City compared to California in general, median household income, you have a lower than average household income than California. You have a lower than average per capita income than California, and you have a higher than average poverty level than California. So just overall compared to California, you're kind of below average on income, above average on poverty. So already the city kind of gets put in a situation where it doesn't have the same resources as a lot of jurisdictions within the state. And then we start looking at, the comparability analysis. So Yuba City's in red, the red bar there. And this is looking at median household income. This is the income for households, regardless of size of those households. And there's a big grouping around the $50,000 range. The city's 3 out of 7 of these, with Rockland, which is in a more affluent area of Sacramento, being much higher. But then you look at per capita income. So the per person income, Yuba City is the lowest of the 7. Again, a fairly tight banding, but going up to 25,000 in Woodland and jumping up to 35,000 in Rockland. So this would indicate somewhat that there's probably a higher persons per household who are reporting income in Yuba City than some of these other places. So your household income is a little higher, but then you drop down per capita. Unemployment. And this is just Yuba City's unemployment rate from 2006 through October of 16. And you had an increase during the recession. There has been a pretty steep decline, and you're currently at 9% as of October of 16, which is it's higher than the state, and it's higher than your comparable agencies, which we show here. So if we look at this, you get the 9%. While it's the lowest you've been in several years, it's still higher than all by significant amount all of your comparable cities, and definitely overall the state higher than the state average. So again, so what we've looked at so far is the money coming into the city is lower than many of these comparable agencies on a per household or per capita income. Your poverty rate's higher. Your unemployment rate is higher as well. And then we start looking at median household incomes, or not household income, median home values. I'm sorry. So median home values. This looks at 2007, right, really at the height of the housing bubble. And then 2015, so you peaked at $297,000 per home, and as of 2015, you're averaging $197,000 per home. So a big drop, right? So a drop of about 30% in home values. So there's been some recovery, but not enough. And then if we look at Yuba City's home values, average home value to your comparable agencies for labor, again, you're at the very bottom of those. So the lowest, with Rockland being nearly twice as high, and others, higher as well. Now, home values get into a couple, actually a number of factors. One, it gets into property taxes available, right? So property taxes is based on not the average home value, but it's the value of when a home was sold, escalated over time. But this indicates that you're going to have lower overall property taxes paid in the community. But it also is an indication of the desirability of development within the community for developers, right, who come in and trying to make a profit by building and selling homes, and that has remained low. So this graph shows the number of building permits per year for single-family dwellings. It peaked in 2004 at 991, but if you look from 2007 down through 2016. Maybe actually all the way up to 2006 down through 2016, that the total of all those years together does not match the 869 in 2005. So there's about 764 down. So what's happened is you went at a fairly fast pace, and it has slowed down and has continued to be slow, which again gets to economic vitality of getting more people who then could generate more retail sales, and all the things that happens around that economic activity. It's been very slow within Yuba City since really 2008. It hasn't really improved much, just up and down a little since then. So let's translate this. We'll turn from those general economic factors to some comparisons of specific economic factors, which is general fund revenue and expenditures per capita. Now, again, this shows, it looks a little more like an American flag than I've seen, just looking it up here, but it's this shows for, again, the comparable agencies. Yuba City is circled there, third from the bottom. And the blue line, or the blue bar, is the revenues. The red bar is the expenses. And you see that based on all the factors, right, that go into the revenues that come into a city, some of which the city has, some of which the city doesn't have, right? There's extra sales taxes, there's property tax, there's normal sales tax. Again, if somebody has a local option sales tax, that would show up in here. Utility users taxes show up in here. Other kind of funding. Different jurisdictions get different amounts of property tax from the 1%. So without so all the complexities of what go into how revenues come into a local jurisdiction are shown up here in aggregate, right? And so what you see is that overall you're pretty close to Chico and Turlock, but you have you're at the lower end of revenue per capita to provide services to the people of Yuba City. And as you can see, the expenses per capita, for the most part, I mean, they do follow revenue. And you do see the more money people have up there, especially Woodland and Lodi, and then Rockland, are actually having deficit spending. Still, that is still happening. And I did check on a few of those because it was a little surprising to me. But that's the position there, and they're using reserves to currently make their budget in 2017. And then actually most of the cities at the lower end have done a pretty good job of balancing their budget along with Yuba City. So again, this just shows that with everything coming in and all those economic factors, that a couple things. One, you've balanced your budget for the most part, but the others, you just have less money to spend than some of your comparable agencies. So from a labor context, when you're comparing salaries and benefits, you just have, there's less money flowing through to all the services provided by the city for Yuba City than more than half of your comparator cities. So that's kind of the broad economic context. And now I want to talk just to look back over the last 10 years to see where the city has been financially. So this table looks at revenues, and what's happened, and you can see within all of these charts that you're going to see, is there is a peak right around 2007, 2008, as the revenues came up from property taxes, all the development that was going on, sales taxes were rising, property values were rising. And then it dipped down, and it's come back up, and it's just, it's really just in the past couple of years come back up to levels that you saw in 2007. So it dipped down. It's taken a long time just to return to those other levels. And so for context, what we showed is from 2006 through 2016, where we have the data, what would the revenues have been if they had grown with a combination of inflation and population, right? So the population has grown about 13%, as we saw in an earlier slide, since 2006. Inflation's grown about 12% during that time, and you would expect as more people come in, inflation goes up, those things will work, not in perfect tandem, but will work to increase revenues as well. So if revenues had grown on a kind of a straight line, with the need for services and the people buying things and houses and all that, you would have been somewhere around $43 million. That's a hypothetical number, right? But it gives some context to, yes, you've caught back up to where you were in 2007, but you're really not as far as you really would like to be or should be if you're just following inflation and population growth. You'd be probably about $4.5 million higher in revenue. Than where you currently are. So that's just to say that, in most jurisdictions many jurisdictions are in this situation where they had the ramp up, they've gone back down, and they're just now either getting back or in some instances are having trouble getting back to the levels they had in 2007, 2008. So it's not an uncommon situation, but again, gives context to where were you, what happened, where are you now. Looking at some of the individual revenues, property tax is one of the largest revenues. And this is both, there's property tax revenue, and then back in the early 2000s, 2004, there was a swap for vehicle license fees for property tax. So they took what you used to get revenue through vehicle license fees. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger got into office by promising to reinstate the lower fee than Gray Davis had put on. That if you remember all of that drama that happened when Gray Davis got thrown out of office, and that resulted in part a few years later in this swap where the state government said, "Look, we're not going to give you state license fees. We're going to give you property tax," and so that shows up as it's called the a VLF in property tax in lieu, and property tax in lieu of VLF. Or sometimes called the VLF swap, the vehicle license fee swap. And if you get down into, just as we start talking about revenues, California state revenues, the whole way of money comes to the city is very complex and a little crazy. It's all rule-based. It makes no sense relative to the services you provide. We kind of saw that from the previous slide, right? You provide the same services those other cities provide, but you have much less money than everybody else, right, or most other jurisdictions. So what you have here is you had a peak in your property taxes in 2008 of $12.2 million between direct property tax and the VLF property tax in lieu. In 2016, these are actuals. These don't include budgeted amounts. You're at 11.4, so you're $750,000 less in last fiscal year in property tax revenues than you were in 2008. So your property tax hasn't recovered, right? And that goes back with proper home values coming down and not coming back up either. But that's revenue, one of your major revenue sources that you haven't seen recovery from. Sales taxes had a faster decline, but they've also had a faster, a steeper return. So one of the things that if you look at this again, this is where we talk about California revenue becoming very crazy. Is that through the 2000s there was what we call the triple flip, right? The triple flip was when Governor Schwarzenegger got into office. He sold recovery bonds for the state, and those recovery bonds were paid by local sales tax. And the local sales tax came out monthly, and they got paid back through the property tax bills, right, on an annual basis, which created all kinds of different cash flow issues, and sometimes you got too much, sometimes you got too little. But that's why the two colors in terms of sales taxes there. Where you are right now in 2016, that triple flip ended, so you got a one-time catch-up payment from times where you got paid too little. That's that different blue line up, or blue bar at the top. And from kind of on an ongoing basis, this year and ongoing, you just get we're back to the Bradley Burns sales tax, and then you'd see one dark blue bar if we added in 2017 there. But what this shows is you have that steep drop and you have that increase, that actually sales taxes have increased at a rate consistent with CPI and population growth. As more people have come into town, they shop about the same amount as other people, so that's additional sales tax. And as goods cost more, there's more sales tax put on them because it's a percent of the cost of sales. And so that has actually increased consistent with those. So you've seen additional revenue come in for sales tax. Unfortunately, it hasn't made up for the revenue lost in property tax and other places, and just kind of the growth you would need to get you back to that 43.6 million we talked about earlier. So going from revenues to expenses, we look at expenses here again. We bifurcated a little, and the bifurcation here is the difference between salaries and benefits, which is the dark blue bar, as well as material, supplies, and services, which would be everything else. It's not salaries and benefits, including fuel, contracts, paper, computers, whatever else you get included in there. That has grown. Again, it peaked the early 2000s, peaked at 36.9 million fiscal year 2009, and you can see the expenses took a little longer than the revenues to start declining, as there's a lag in figuring that out, and it stayed down, well below that level until just FY16. So for the first time, you exceeded your expenses in fiscal year. From fiscal year 2009, and this year you're a little higher than that. The compound growth on expenses has been about 2.3% a year over that 10-year period. And the revenues we looked earlier, and we'll see this in a second, that compound growth is actually 1.6%. And so the expenses here, and when you look at this, the salaries and benefits, even it's pretty flat from 2011 and starts going up a little in FY16 and 17. And some of that has been there was a reduction in staff, right? So actually you had positions that didn't get filled. You had a 10% furlough that showed a reduction in cost. That furlough then actually came off the books in 2016. You saw the effect of that in 2016. And while some employees did started paying for their PERS costs, it didn't offset the full amount. So you see a jump there and a jump because you've added in some firefighters as well this past year. So what you have, this again shows that there's a general flow up and down that comes with revenues as it follows that. And this just shows the net. If we compare the revenues that came in with the expenses, and this goes again from 2006 through, and this does add in the 17 budget because that's what you've adopted. So everything before that is actual, through 16 is actual dollars, and then 2017 is the budgeted amount. And so the important things to look at here is, one, starting fiscal year 9, right after the crash of the, you saw the crash of your revenues, the city for a period of 5 years ran a deficit. So that meant that there was more money going out than coming in, and your reserves were being reduced. Over the last 3 years, or 14 through 16, there is actually there's a positive net revenue. So you had more money at the end of the year than you started with, or more money came in than went out. And that's a combination of you started seeing the sales taxes increase, but also a majority of this is because you've had vacancies. So as the economy got better, and as people had opportunities for jobs other places, there's kind of some pent up demand. You saw people leave, and you've had trouble filling some of your positions. So those vacancies, it's not a planned vacancy. It's you have positions that you're trying to fill. You haven't been able to fill them. That does come to savings for the city, and it comes in the form of one-time money, right? So because you're still trying to fill those positions. That one-time money has been spent by the city for one-time expenses, whether it's pensions or retiree health, accrued liability, or monies to pay for infrastructure. That's been the appropriate place to put that, and that's what the city has decided to do. In fiscal year 17, that negative $200,000 that shows there is the budget amount. That does assume that you have full, you have all your FTEs in place, and you're paying everybody that's authorized by council to be paid. Most likely that won't happen, and you'll have another year where the revenues will actually end up higher than expenses. The problem is that, again, is one-time money. If you really are trying to hire these positions, eventually they'll get hired, that money will go out, and so that doesn't become ongoing money for other raises or more people. That is, if you look at 2017 says that everything is on the books. If you fully paid all your expenses and got the revenues that were expected, you're going to end up at $200,000 negative. The reality is we don't think that'll happen because you have some savings on your expense side. But overall, that shows the work also that's been done by staff in balancing a budget, and by council in adopting budgets that were balanced and making difficult choices over the years, and employees of taking difficult choices, of taking a 10% furlough and then accepting things. So I think this really shows also a story of a partnership between council and staff and labor unions to make things work in the city. And this is the context, right? There's been a structural imbalance that we talked about a little earlier, because during this time, your expenses have still grown faster than your revenues. And that has created the issues that you've experienced the last few years. So now, what will the future bring, right? So what are we looking at over the next 5 years or so? What's coming up? And this is an important question for you to, for the city to ask all the time. The city does a good job of asking that question. It's a very important question for you to ask in terms of, what can you do as with your labor contracts, right? You have people that haven't had a raise or very minimal raises over the last several years. And so we want to look at where do you have money to spend? You have a lot of other needs as well. Those say values. Those have some amount in there. Sorry, there's a printing error there. So I think it's between my computer and your computer, Robin. This came up before, but this shows. Looking at health expenses have been on the rise for the last several years, from 2009 through 2017. The average growth has been 7.8%, with obviously much higher growth in the last several years. And we're expecting future growth to occur roughly at the same level at about 7% is what we've estimated. So a little less. 2017 is dropped down lower. That is an anomaly, and we're not the expectation isn't that it's going to stay at that low. And this is the health premiums that the city pays for their for employee health care costs. And if those come true, and here we've shown that 17 was 0.8%. We just assumed, for the sake of argument, that FY18 remains slow as well, and then those healthcare projections grow. If that's the case, over by fiscal year 23, the city will be paying about $1.5 million more just in healthcare. And so, as we talk about a few of these things, the issue with that is that the healthcare costs increase, and these aren't because you've added new positions or people are really getting a better deal on their healthcare. It's really just to keep pace with the benefits you provide now and at the same level that you provide them to your employees. And so it costs you more money, but you're not getting any more service, and employees aren't really seeing any additional monies from this either. The other big piece here, this is going to kind of evolve over 3 slides, is your pension costs. Pension costs have gone up significantly through CalPERS, with the city is part of CalPERS. Over the last 15 years, there's been a very consistent and high growth in pension costs for a variety of reasons. But each year, PERS says, gives you an estimate of what your costs are going to be for pension increases. And this just shows the increase based on the PERS estimate from this past, from 2016 for over the next 5 years. So your rates in 2017 are set. So this goes from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 23. And you see a combined, this is just annual increases. They actually accumulate on each other. So when you add all these together, by FY23, you're paying $3.6 million a year more for pensions. And that's just for your existing, existing people. Their pensions aren't improving. It's just as PERS recalculates the cost of providing those pensions. That's based on the fact that, they look at how many people you have, how when they're retiring, how old they are, what your rates are, all those things that they look from an actuarial basis. This is their expectation. So you see a lot of costs increasing in these next few years, going from $390,000 to $870,000 a year. And again, these are just year-to-year increases. Now, the other problem that the PERS has had, and this has really just recently come out in December. The PERS board, after many years of discussing this, lowered the discount rate. And the discount rate for PERS is the expected return on their investments that they have on a long-term basis, right? So over a 20, 30-year term basis, they had been expecting 7.5%, and over the next several years, they're going to be decreasing that discount rate, their expected return, from 7.5% to 7%. That 7% rate has an impact on what you have to pay, because there's expectation is there's less money that's going to be in the system to cover costs from investment returns. That means the city's going to have to make it up, and so that's what this shows. And so the dark blue line is the amount we showed on the previous slide of what PERS said in 2016. In the fall of 2016, hey, here's the increases you're going to have over the next 5 years. That lighter blue bar on top, that's the additional amount of increase that we're currently expecting. It's not, PERS hasn't given us rates, and so these are amounts that are based on the best information PERS has from a broader perspective of rates, and that adds, again, another $262,000 at the low, $767,000 in FY21, and they're doing a couple of things there. One is they're easing in the rate growth. They're going from 7.5% in 18 down to 7.375, down to 7.25, and then finally they're going to hit 7% in FY21. And so these are annual cumulative increases, and so you just have a lower increase in the following years, but all those increases stay the same. So what does that mean? Here this means an extra $2.2 million a year to the city. And excuse there's clearly a problem with the with the thing I sent over, but you can see there's an increase of pension costs going out from where you are right now. So FY17, the light blue bar, and we just hold that steady, right? So this is the amount is about $6.9 million the city is paying in FY16. That's on the light blue bar. It goes up with the dark blues, what PERS said, hey, this is what you're going to get increased. The light blue is the additional amount we expect through 2023. And we go from 6.9 million this year to it's 12.5 million in FY23. So that's nearly double, right? So it's getting close to doubling the cost. Now this is the entire city. So it's this is both general fund and everything else we've talked before about revenue and expenses has been general fund. We didn't pull this apart, by trying to get by enterprise fund, but this is general fund as well as your sewer funds and other enterprise funds that you have, water funds. but it's going up about, it's nearly going from 6.7 to 12.5, so about $5.8 million a year by 2023. So that's money again. That's the problem with that is that's it's a $5.8 million jump, but you're not getting any more staff. You're not paying people anymore. You're not getting any more service for that. But it's cost of existing employees doing existing work that you have to figure out some way to absorb. So we want to look at what that meant for the city on a go-forward basis. So I have two slides. There's a reason I break this up into two slides. The first one shows both is historical, going back to fiscal year 10. You can see the problems the city had. The blue line is revenue. The red line is expense. This shows the issues that the city had in the early years where expenses were greater than revenue. What's happened in the last few years, we talked about, primarily because of what's happened with vacancies has been better. And this shows, again, this is what the projection might be. And this kind of assumes, we said, well, we know what the PERS rates were in the fall. So this does not include any increase from the discount rate. So here's what we were told last fall, what the PERS rates would be. Here's what we believe healthcare costs are going to be. And then we looked at just a 10-year average of, costs for salaries, non-pension, non-health benefits, and materials, supplies, and services. Those have gone up about 2% a year. So that's included in the expense line. On the revenue line, we looked at some actually, I think fairly liberal projections for sales tax and property taxes, assuming they're going to go up about 3% a year. And then everything else is going to increase that 10-year historical average of about 1.4%. And so what this shows, if that was the case, the city wouldn't be in a fantastic position, but you'd be in a good, solid position, right? I think what this graph represents is the work the city has done that we talked about, the work that you've done, the council and staff and unions have done together, is to create a budget that should have been balanced over the next several years, even with all the ongoing issues with growth and other issues the city has. That you built a budget that could probably work at a reasonable level with some growth built into it. The problem that happens is when, and this is the dotted line here, is that with the PERS discount rate increases, you're looking at somewhere around possibly about $2.7 million, or it's like $2.2 million. The additional $2.2 million. The question of where does that come from, right? How do you fund that additional cost in pensions? Now the $2.2 million is those increase for the discount rate. PERS is said this summer. I don't know if they've changed that time frame, but July of this year they'll provide the city with new actuarials that include that amount. So we'll be able to see exactly what that is. So this is an estimate at this time, but it's going to be somewhere, I think pretty close to this. Hopefully not more. Be great if it's less. But this is, I think, a fairly reasonable estimate of what that cost will be. And so the issue that the city has to deal with now is where you've worked to put yourself in a position to, start, I think, rebuilding some of what you had to give away, is that the PERS rates are going up. And they're going up at a pace you're not quite sure yet exactly. You won't know until July. And so that this adds a lot of uncertainty into your budgeting process, unfortunately. It adds uncertainty into, how exactly do you fund this additional cost? And again, just like all your pension costs, it's increasing because of how, the way PERS does business and how they fund all this. And you're not getting any more service. Your employees aren't getting paid anymore. It's guaranteed. It's putting them in a position to make sure they'll have money when they retire. So that's the positive. But it's not giving them more money in their pockets today, right? And it's not giving you more people to provide services with police or fire or parks and recreation or every place else the city provides services. It doesn't provide that for you either, right? But it's additional costs you have to figure out a way to fund, and you have to figure out a way of absorbing that. And so that's kind of the issue that I think we're left with at this point, is that the city's done a lot of great work to put yourself in a position of growing, and really, and it's just been PERS made this decision in December, and it was mid-January when they came out with estimates of, hey, here's how we think this is going to impact you. And so this is really, it's very new information. It's information that, that your staff as well as, cities throughout the state are still trying to absorb and like, what does this mean? How do we pay this? How does this impact the plans we've had for our budget? And unfortunately, that's kind of where we have to leave it right now. You have a situation where you've done good work, but you put yourself in a good position, and this kind of throws a curveball in that. So I think it puts the city in a difficult position as it relates to additional spending, and you're in a situation back to how do we fund all this within the constraints we have of revenues. And again, I'll say this again, revenues that don't necessarily match costs relative to the kind of services we should be providing. There's formulas and revenues come in, you have to figure out how to provide cost with that. And here a cost is coming in, you have to figure out how do you still provide services and absorb these costs. So kind of in conclusion, I think I just want to say, I just want to conclude, I think that dotted red line is the result of unanticipated, unforeseen costs with PERS. The city has done a good job of managing its financial condition through the recession. So I think both the pension and health costs as well, right? I hope that'd be great if those were able to keep down, but there's a lot of uncertainty about health costs in the future as well. Again, we've talked about the pension CalPERS rates, and just the fact that I think what we know now with the city's, with what the city has done and what's happening with CalPERS is that you're just going to have to be careful. Staff will have to be careful. Labor negotiators will have to be careful with any changes that you make to staffing or compensation. How does that impact what you're able to do is the question that's before you. And I think as you're absorbing the cost of the pension increases, and we don't know exactly the numbers yet, it puts you in a very difficult position to make some of those calls at this point in my opinion. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Russ. Does council have any questions for Russ at this time?
If I may?
Yes.
Yeah, Russ, on the slide number 29, does that include the 1.3 million that you referenced regarding increased in healthcare costs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, the 28 that includes the healthcare cost increase,
Okay.
as well as the pension increase without the discount rate increase. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No?
Madam Vice Mayor, just a couple, just to expand upon what Russ has shared. Russ, would you mind going back to slide 27? Just to put it in perspective, this shows roughly $6 million worth of costs over the next 6 years. On average, about $1 million a year, incrementing up over that time. Our general fund revenues over the last 10 years have gone up about $5 million. And you can do the simple math there and realize that at the rate our revenues have been increasing, this is going to be a challenge to Yuba City as we face the future. The good news is that we've been historically conservative as a city. Your council put aside money in the trust fund for pension trust. So we've anticipated increases, not to this magnitude that you're seeing this evening, but also that we're not alone. This is not unique to Yuba City. I think Yuba City will actually fare better than most cities. This is going to be a shock to the system. And a financial analyst who works for the League of California Cities likens this to the next 2008, the equivalent to the 2008 recession hitting cities without the recession happening. So you're going to see this impact a lot of cities. I believe Yuba City is actually ahead of the curve in having done the analysis that was presented this evening. So the good news is we'll make it through. But the other side of the coin is that it's going to be a significant challenge in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All right. Okay, that was for note and file for us, and we have a second report, and that's the financial report to the 6 months ending December 31st, 2016. And it's Robin again.
Hi. If I could just go back to the last presentation. First, I would like to thank Russ very much. He put a lot of time and effort into this, and I genuinely appreciate getting a third-party perspective. I've been living and breathing Yuba City's finances for so long that, admittedly, I think I'm a bit biased, so I appreciate the third-party perspective. Thank you. I apologize for the slides. Our version of PowerPoint and Russ's don't seem to link up real well. We'll get the Adobe posted out on the city's website on the finance page, so it'll be available to anybody that wants to take a look at it. And then lastly, as it relates to the PERS projections that you saw, I do want to let you know that finance calculated them twice. We had Russ calculate them, and we also had the city's financial advisors, NHA, give us some perspective on what they projected that they would be. And city staff sat down with a senior actuary the week before last at the CSMFO conference and reviewed them with him, showed him what we had done using the CalPERS circular letter that they put out, and he was in agreement that our projections were right on with the best available information that's currently available. As the actuaries come out next July, we'll definitely be fine-tuning those, but I felt like I definitely received confirmation from him at the annual conference, so that made me feel much more confident in, frankly, the bad news that we were providing you with tonight. Thank you. With that, I'll move on. My financial report tonight is fairly brief. We've inundated you with financial information already. I will be starting off with the city's general fund and then moving into the city's water and wastewater funds. This is a summary of the general fund budget versus actual at the highest level, including the beginning fund balances as of July 1st, 2016, total revenues and total expenditures and fund balance on a budget basis and through the first 6 months of the fiscal year. The fund balance amount includes only the uncommitted amount. It does not include $715,000, which is committed. So strictly the uncommitted fund balance. The year-to-date amounts are on a cash basis and represent the amounts received for revenue and expended for expenses as of December 31st. There are no accounting accruals included in this. The original budgeted expenses for fiscal year 16-17 were $40.05 million, just over $40 million. To that, we added $797,000 in grant funds that we also expect to receive revenues for, and $462,000 for purchase order commitments. The total current budgeted expenditures are just above $41.3 million. Since revenues are on a cash basis and property tax revenues aren't received until February and May of each year, our general fund has a net deficit as of December 31st. This is typical and should not be alarming. It merely represents a cash flow issue with the city's pooled cash reserves. It doesn't represent a long-term problem. By the end of the fiscal year, the city will once again have a positive fund balance in the general fund. This shows you in yellow the percentage of budgeted amounts received for each of these top, there's 8 that I'm going to show you, the top 8 revenue sources for the general fund. The yellow is the percentage of the amount budgeted that we've actually received so far year to date through December. The dark blue is the portion remaining that has not been received. Since we're 50% through the fiscal year, you would think that we're under budget on our revenues, but these are pretty typical of the cash flows that we see for our general fund. There's nothing here that alarms me. We received a small payment for property tax revenues halfway through the year, but we receive our first installment in February, so that's typical. By the end of the year, finance projects that property tax revenues will be right on track with what we budgeted. We budgeted for a 4% increase, and assessed values for the general fund increased by 3.95% for the fiscal year. So we'll be right on track with what we projected. and the details of the changes in assessed valuations were included in the written report provided to City Council, so I won't go through those in detail tonight. Sales tax is our number one revenue source for the city's general fund. You can see from looking here on a cash basis, I think our battery's dying. Thank you, Terrell. Here we go. On a cash basis, it's been very volatile, and on an adjusted basis, it's a little more uniform. It's still pretty volatile and difficult to project on a go-forward basis. Our projections include a 3.75% increase for this fiscal year. You can see that we only have 1 quarter's worth of data so far. On a cash basis, a negative 0.4, and on an adjusted basis, a positive 0.2. I'm hoping that that's an irregularity and that the future quarters will show the increases that we've projected, but we'll be watching it closely to see if it starts meeting the budget projections or not. The adjusted basis that I show up there includes any double-up payments. It factors in double payments or missed payments by our commercial businesses in town. So it shows us what we can expect when the cash actually catches up with what has happened. Motel surcharge revenues exceeded the 25% expected because as of December 31st, we only had the first quarter receipts. We didn't expect revenues to reach 50% as the December quarter end is paid to the city in January of 2017. Building permit revenues are at 56.1% of budget estimates, showing the increase in development activity. We increased the budget for building permit revenues in fiscal year 16-17 as well, based upon historical trends we've seen the last couple of years. Special police services are 21.5% of the amount budgeted. Business licenses are only at 3.5%, but we're not concerned with the low percentages. We bill typically quarterly for some of the special police services and annually in January for business license revenues. So again, we expect the majority of city general fund revenues will be on track with budget by the time we conclude the end of the fiscal year. As far as expenditures, we've expended 44.5% of the amounts budgeted for salaries and benefits. The savings below 50% is based upon vacancies in almost all cases that Human Resources is in the process of recruiting for. I compared the percentage as of December 31st just to see how we compared with last year as of December 31st. Last year's percentage was higher at 46.6%. So what that tells me is our vacancies are a little bit higher this year than what they were last year as of December 31st. This savings, to me, is an indication that we will once again have a surplus at the end of the fiscal year. But as I look at that, it's definitely one-time savings that we will want to put towards a one-time cost in the future, since it won't be reoccurring once we fill positions. 49.5% of amounts budgeted for operating expenses have been expended halfway through the year. And in total, general fund expenditures are at 45.1% of the total amount budgeted for the year. Each department's estimated total expenses for fiscal year 16-17 will be submitted to finance with their budget submissions in April. At that point, I can go through and tally up how much the projected savings will be for fiscal year 16-17. This is a summary of the city's unfunded pension liabilities as of June 30th, 2016. It shows you that the safety plan had assets totaling $94 million, miscellaneous had assets totaling $78.9 million, minus the actuarially computed liabilities, which left an unfunded liability for safety of $27.2 million, miscellaneous $30.6 million. And a funded status for safety of 77.5% and 72.1% for miscellaneous, leaving a total net unfunded pension liability of $59 million. With that, I will move on to the city's water fund. This shows you the city's water fund operating revenues are at 50% of budget. The City Council approved the water rate revenue increases in June of 2016. They were effective August 1st of 2016. Those increases weren't read in the meters until September 1st, and then they were billed by finance at the end of September 2016. So we have 3 months worth of data in here of the increases built in. Revenues are right on track with what our budget projections were for the end of the fiscal year based upon what we're seeing thus far. Capital connection fee revenues are at 68% of the amount budgeted. Operating expenditures are at 44.5%, less than the 50% that we would expect. The savings occurs in 2 categories: salaries and benefits, because there's 4.5 vacant positions within the water fund, and O&M accounts are less than. Operations and maintenance expenditures have been less than budgeted so far through December 31st. And debt service here shows that it's less than the anticipated 50% amount because we've only paid interest. We pay interest and principal in June, so we only pay the interest portion of our bond debt in December, so it's less than what you would anticipate. This is a summary of the city's wastewater utility. The wastewater operating revenues are at 49% of budget, just slightly less than budget expectations. Capital connection fee revenues are at 64%. Operating expenditures are significantly less than the 50%. They're at 39.7%. And that's related to 4 different categories: salaries and benefits. There's 4 vacant positions as of December 31st within the wastewater fund. Heat and power are less than expected. Specialized equipment and building and facility operations and maintenance are less than expected, and so are chemicals. This is a slide showing the city's debt coverage ratio. We're required to keep this bottom amount at 1.2%. You can see that as of December 31st, we weren't meeting it for the water fund. We have other reserve funds that we pull in order to help us meet that threshold, and we're allowed to do that per our bond covenants. But we always look at that in finance to see how much cash we have available. What this shows you is, as far as capital connection fee revenue, the water fund as of December 31st only had $397,000. The wastewater fund had $1.3 million. This is the annual debt service coming from connection fees for water and for wastewater, and then you do a calculation and come up with the bottom line here. And our bond covenants dictate that if we don't recover our debt coverage ratio, which is total operating and capital revenues minus all of the expenditures, et cetera, at 1.2, we'll raise rates. And we were at that point last year with the water fund. What this shows you, though, is that we only have about 3 months worth of debt service coverage in cash in the bank in our capital connection fee fund. In the wastewater fund, we've got about 1 year and 2/3. So we're much better positioned cash-wise to cover our debt service for capital connection fee debt service. In the water fund, not so much. So what we'll have to do in the water fund is draw down our available cash reserves from operating and capital projects in order to meet debt service until development picks up. And finance tracks that completely separately, so we know how much we're, in essence, borrowing from ourselves. But this is something I like to show City Council just as an awareness issue. With that, I will answer any questions you have.
Okay, you have overloaded us with numbers tonight. So any questions from council for Robin? Nope. Okay. Since it is our general item, I'd like to go ahead and open it to the public if there's any comments at this time as well. None? Okay, we'll bring it back to council. Thank you, Robin. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And we have, our next item is the realignment funding for gang resistance education and training program. It's for acronym GREAT. We have our chief.
Chemical wipes.
Good evening, Vice Mayor, council members. It's good to see you out of the EOC after that last long week, and I appreciate all your help this past week. The item before you today is conduct a council hearing, not a public hearing, for acceptance of realignment funding from the state of California in the amount of $51,855 and authorize and approve expenditure recommendations. Just for background, in past years, dependent upon state budget priorities, funds have been allocated to law enforcement agencies to assist in carrying out priorities as established by the Chief of Police and his staff due to the impacts of realignment. And if you're not familiar with realignment in Assembly Bill 109, it was basically taking people out of prison, reducing sentences, changing the way they credited service, and essentially putting more people on the street and getting people out of prison and trying to put them under local control. Beginning with 2012-2013, the state budget has provided funding for municipal frontline law enforcement as it's been available. This is probably going to be the last year of that, according to sources within the California Police Chiefs Association. This year, the budget allocated $20 million to cities in California to increase positive outcomes between municipal law enforcement and high-risk populations. The 2016-17 awards were determined based on a combination of factors. They include size of police departments in each county, mental health and homeless population data. Each city was designated with an allotted amount, and the amount for Yuba City was the $51,855. Local law enforcement agencies may use the funding to supplement, but not supplant, the following: a homeless outreach team, crisis intervention training for officers, gang-resistant education and training, the GREAT program, outreach to high-risk youth diversion programs, or gang and violence prevention programs. The funding may not be used to supplant any existing law enforcement services provided by the city, and no cash match is required. We chose to focus on GREAT because it will directly impact 3 of those 5 areas. The GREAT program is an evidence-based national and international gang and violence prevention program that's been building trust between law enforcement and communities for over 30 years. GREAT's intended as an immunization against delinquency, youth violence, and gang membership. It's designed for children in the years immediately before the prime ages for introduction into gang and delinquent behavior. The GREAT program is built around school-based, law enforcement officer-instructed classroom curricula. Each of the instructors is required to attend a training put on by the GREAT program itself, and it's all paid for by the GREAT as far as the training, but you have to put them up, pay their salary and everything while you go there. It's a very expensive program for us to get officers into, and that's one of the things we're going to try to offset here. GREAT assists in building better relationships between law enforcement and community. It reduces gang joining while increasing attitudes toward gangs and positive attitudes toward law enforcement. It teaches children to deal more effectively with serious issues affecting their behavior and the community, such as bullying, managing anger, and making good decisions. In conjunction with the Sutter County Probation Department, we've conducted almost 150 classes and reached over 3,500 students. We've utilized some of these realignment allocations in the past to supplement the GREAT program. I recommend that the Police Department continue to support and grow the program in the Yuba City Unified School District, and we'd recommend utilizing a major portion of that amount in the allocation to fund the purchase of a vehicle that could be utilized in school presentations and other community events, and the remaining money to be used on classroom material and training for an additional officer who will be taught to teach the curriculum. The vehicle will be similar to DARE vehicles in the past. The vehicle will have a promotional wrap and a distinctive paint job which contain the words YCPD on it and GREAT throughout it on the exterior. It'd be used for community events, school programs, and to support and advertise the program to our community. We're also looking at the possibility of acquiring a Humvee through U.S. government at a very minimal cost, but we don't know if that's possible or not. And if we do that, we would use this money to fix it up similar to a DARE vehicle, except for the GREAT program, and the remaining money to all go into the training material, advertising, and training for the additional positions of teaching, not an additional police position, but additional instructors from our current force. Utilizing the money for the GREAT program would keep in the department's goal to build a bridge between our at-risk youth and our local law enforcement. It would also provide an outlet for reaching our youth with education and prevention at an early and influential age. The fiscal impact: there is no city match required for the $51,855. The alternative is to provide staff with alternative spending paths, which would not supplant routine expenditures in the general fund. And the recommendation of staff is to authorize the Chief of Police to accept the 2016-17 fiscal year realignment funding and approve expenditure recommendations. Further authorize the Chief Financial Officer to make the budget adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Chief. Bring
And
it
with
back.
that, I'll open up for any questions.
And do we have any questions for Chief? If not, we can move for a motion.
Chief, just confirming for me, if you don't mind, the 51,000, there's nothing coming out of your existing budget? Everything you want to do will be covered by this grant?
That's correct. All of this money is no match required.
All right, and then no, you answered my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? A motion?
Through Vice Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion, staff recommendation.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have the Bureau of Reclamation grants to identify water leaks. And Diana.
Good evening, Vice Mayor and Council. Cheryl, can you bring up the presentation, please? So over the last few months, the city's been working with water system optimization on a water loss control program. So through that, they've gone through, analyzed our financial records, we've tested meters, we've done a series of events to try to quantify the volume of water that we could potentially be losing throughout the system. One of the recommendations that they've made is that we set up a demand management area. And so they brought to our attention a couple of grant opportunities through the Bureau of Reclamation to identify water leaks. So the purpose of the grant would be to acquire grant funding to assist the city with the installation and implementation of district metered areas, better known as DMAs, to reduce water loss due to water distribution system leakage. So what is a district metered area? Basically what you do is you have a pipe coming into, whether it's a neighborhood or a larger area, your water coming in from a couple different locations. You put meters on those distribution pipes. You then compare the flow going through those meters to the flow going through the meters of the customers. If you have more water going through the meters on the pipe than what's being given to your customers, that's indicating that you have a leak within the system. So it's a great tool to identify areas that you may have leaks. So what do DMAs do? They allow staff to investigate specific areas within the city's distribution system and measure effectiveness of water loss prevention efforts. They enable the city to apply resources directly to problem areas and provide the city with better information which will improve future water distribution models. So why is reducing water loss important? It makes efficient use of the city's raw water sources. It reduces variable costs of water production related to chemicals and energy. Plus, it's mandated by the state that we reduce our overall water consumption by 2020. So the initial findings of the water loss control program is that the city is seeing real losses on a per service connection per day of 52 gallons. WSO estimates that about 50% of that could be recovered, or about 550 acre feet per year. So that's, when you're looking at losses, you have to look at the economic benefit of how much you put into trying to fix the losses versus what you're going to gain out of that. You're never going to fix all of the leaks within a distribution system. So from a cost-benefit analysis, you have to determine where's your break point. And so they're saying based upon that analysis, they think we could recover about 50% of that water loss by identifying where the leaks are occurring and then addressing those leaks. So if successful with obtaining a grant, we would come forward to council to bring the grant award and then talk about specifics of a project. So right now, we're submitting under 2 grant programs this idea of setting up DMAs. If we were to be successful, we would come back with specific information as to what we would specifically do with the funds, because it's up to $1 million, but it's a 50% match from the city. So when we do that, we want to make sure it's cost effective, that either we focus on areas where we've identified that we have significant leaks to try to quantify where specifically within that area are they located, or are we going to try to address the whole city at once? So the item before you tonight is just for us to be able to submit resolutions authorizing me to submit the grant applications, but before we move forward with the grants, we'd bring them back to you with more specific detail as to what the project would actually be. So with that, the recommendation is to adopt 2 resolutions related to the 2 different grants.
Thank you, Diana. I'll bring it back to the council for any questions.
All right, if I may. Diana, thank you for that. Just a question, the 50% anticipated recovery, is that, I know it's early on, that's an estimate, is that enough to generate enough savings to make it worth the city's match?
That would generate quite a bit of savings. I don't think we would be coming forward with $1 million grant application. I just don't see us do that. I see us doing a smaller scale project just to see how it works before we invest in doing a larger scale project throughout the city. And so definitely based upon a smaller scale project where we know we have some problem areas, I think it could be, from a cost benefit standpoint, it would be beneficial to then identify, it helps us to identify which pipes need to be replaced versus which pipes need spot repairs, that type of thing. So it just gives us more tools to be able to identify where we really need to put our resources.
And that sounds like that would also save us money.
Mm-hmm. From a water, what we purchase, what we pay for water, we pay the same amount regardless of the amount of water that we use based upon our water contracts. So where does this save us the money? The amount of water that we're able to save by reducing the losses allows us to then sell that water to future customers. And so that's where we really gain the benefit of this, is not only the staff time in terms of dealing with leaks, but that it's having that water available for the future, so then we're not having to go to other resources to try to gain that water. So that's really the benefit of it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other? Yes.
So, Diana, so we have meters installed in the ground on our mains for subdivisions, and you read them or how are we doing that?
No, so that would be part of this project.
Okay.
So we would identify a demand management area, and this grant would help us pay to install the meters, up to the 50%. And so that we would then go out and install the meters, then use those as the basis for comparison to the customer meters within that area.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Do we have a motion?
I would move staff's recommendation to submit an application for grant funds from the United States Bureau of Reclamation and Water SMART for water and energy efficiency, and additionally for the Water SMART for drought response program grants for the upcoming fiscal year.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay. Thank you, Diana. All right. We are going to move on to business for City Council. First of all, we'll go through some comments and observations regarding the Oroville Dam spillway emergency that we recently went through and are still trying to recover from. So we will start with Councilmember Buckland.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. A couple things that came to interest through this process is first, an understanding by our community of how emergency operations work in a jurisdiction. There seemed to be some lacking information, but the opening of an emergency operations center requires that the city or the jurisdictions involved in an EOC come together and have a management system. The management system that FEMA has provided for us is the incident command system. And this is a structure of management for a critical incident absent of political posturing. It's important to know that it deals with the incident at hand, it manages that incident, and resources are put towards the mitigation of that incident. One of the things that I noticed through this, and I'm going to kind of go through just a couple brief comments, and then I'll follow it up with some potential future action that I see out of it. is as the incident at Oroville unfolded, this was a regional incident that occurred very quickly, absent information. We didn't have good, clear information, and I'm not going to point any fingers at anyone at all, but very slow response to information that was required to make some critical decisions. On top of that, evacuations were thrown almost immediately based on media input. What that did was it barred individuals in the way of an imminent threat upstream from a clear evacuation route. That becomes a concern because certainly we needed to have a more regional approach, and certainly knowing some of the facts that were coming forward. We knew that for the very first time that the emergency spillway, renamed hours after the first water spilled over it to the auxiliary spillway, and then later renamed as the emergency spillway, began to erode, and there were concerns that came about from that. We all saw it. The media saw it. The media was responding to it. And I think that as the incident unfolded, that it created great concern not only for our citizens, but also for government leaders and certainly the management of preservation of life should something happen. There's been a lot on social media regarding the city versus the county and what the evacuation orders were, or varying components of an evacuation order. And some of the things that I think need to be understood, and certainly by the general public, I had to kind of go back and look. And part of this is our last big incident was in 1997. I'm going to guess that a large part of our population that was reacting on social media probably was too young or not even born yet when much of the 1997 or even the 1986 flood events occurred in our community. But when we go into a mandatory evacuation, there's a number of things that law enforcement has to do. The first thing that they should do is request mutual aid from areas not affected by an immediate threat. Care facilities. Any care facility has to be emptied of its patients. Jails, places of confinement need to be emptied out. Hospitals have to be put into a secure, the patients have to be put into a secure environment or moved from those facilities. Those without transportation have to be moved from the jurisdictions. And then the other question is, we have a whole homeless component here in our area that have to be dealt with and also evacuated. There's places that those individuals all go. There are plans that are put into place, but it becomes chaotic when all of a sudden, with a moment's notice, the whole process is kicked into gear. What's really required are ingress restrictions to allow emergency medical services to arrive in the area, the ordering of ambulances from outside jurisdictions, police officers, sheriff's deputies, the California Highway Patrol, the National Guard. But you also have to then plan egress routes for those that are being asked to leave the area. Everything has to be done in a way where communication is paramount and available to each of those affected. I look back and realize that in evacuations in 1986 and 1997, the radio played a great part to the management of information locally. TV played a part in 86 97 and in 2017 for this most recent event. Probably played it to a more dramatic effect with what was going on at Oroville Dam because it became international news. But the piece that drove most of the response was social media, something we have not dealt with before, and the rumors versus facts became problematic. We probably didn't do a very good job of managing the social media content. Things were changing and evolving quickly, but we needed to be able to provide updates through some system, much of which has taken place while this incident transpired and in the subsequent days. Some of the recommendations that I've looked at, we can't forecast the future, but we can certainly look back on a Monday morning quarterback and look at when should an EOC have opened. It could have opened sooner, began to manage the information better, having resources at the dam and other ideas to be able to get evacuation underway should it become paramount. We received information slowly, and even the inundation maps dealing with the failure of the emergency spillway structure were coming to us slow. We knew from the 1997 event what the flood rate would look like, but the misuse of information like wall of water, it's imminent, and you have to get out of town quickly, caused chaos. I think one of the things that I know happened that impacted the roads and the egress routes were the fact that people did not take heed, and it was their personal safety. They started trying to preserve property. I saw a number of cars leaving Yuba City with single occupants. Multiple vehicles being taken out of families, out of just preservation of their transportation. Those items, in cases like this, should it have become more immediate for their departure, should try to consolidate their transportation and not congest roads for the mere fact of saving a car. Much of this needs to transpire in a public forum in advance. People don't even know, and you can read on social media today, the ignorance of the public in certain relations to the height of the dam structure and how can it be 770 feet when they're talking about 901 feet. They don't understand that one is structure and one is elevation. They don't understand what elevations in the river mean. They become panicked when for the first time in probably 12, 14 years, they see water crossing over the soccer fields in Marysville. I don't know, but I grew up here. I pretty much have seen it, and much deeper. The bathroom roofs are absolutely covered in water. A lot of the past certainly would be beneficial for folks to realize when they're facing danger. And again, I think that building that information up in the community would have been very, very helpful as this went or began to unfold in the early days. I know on Thursday, many members of the council, the mayors, some of the supervisors all met and did a press conference trying to assure people that information would be released if an incident unfolded. And the catcalling that went on by the public, they're not telling us. It's a conspiracy. Something's going to happen. None of this was forecast. The information coming forward, we knew that there were risks by putting water over an unused spillway. But all of those things, I believe, you know, when you look back at it Monday morning, there's some things that can change, and I think that they will change. You know, everybody here was involved in it. The EOC, we were in and out of that EOC frequently. Councilman Cardoza was helping protect the flow in and out of Marysville for the first early hours of this. But again, everybody has a job to do, and that job is to protect life. And I think that our staff, one of the best run EOCs that I've seen was this incident, where the operation of that center was up and within just hours, and fully functional out at Station 4. So are there some things that we can do different? Absolutely. Are there things that we will do different? I believe so. I think that as we have proceeded through this, we've certainly identified some things along the communication lines. And then I'll reserve towards the very end, and I may just do it in my individual report, some of the things that were discussed down on a more regional basis.
Great, thank you. We will, Councilmember Cardoza.
That's pretty hard comeback to come from. I'm just going to make it
Just
easy.
share your
Yeah,
points.
just share my. I'm going to make it easy. Councilman Buckland said it very gracefully. I really don't need to repeat, but he said it right. I did have the honor and privilege of working with our Public Works employees and also our police department. It was a pretty exciting evening. You can't tell somebody that they're going to go over the bridge. Yeah, it was pretty boisterous. I had fun time, even not only the communities but the TV stations, thinking that they're better than us, that they can do whatever they want. But like I said, it was a very exciting evening. I'm glad it's over with, and like John said, we'll be better prepared next time. Thank you.
Thank you. We got Councilmember Harris.
Again, very well said by Council Member Buckland here. I had a unique perspective in that I was doing the up all night thing in the EOCs, both EOCs, and in a patrol car, trying to get people out of town as quickly as possible. And we had the, I'm not going to say frustration, but the unique opportunity to do so with next to no notice. I believe it was about an hour. Traffic was backed up. I too saw way too many vehicles with one occupant in them, which is frustrating because every vehicle makes a big difference. We try to establish routes as best as possible, get people, open up every valve to get people going in the right direction. In our case, it's south and west. Very emotional for folks. We had one couple, we responded to an accident that they were involved in out in Sutter. An elderly couple, you know, they're just minding their own business. They were confused. They didn't know what to do. They made a U-turn in front of another vehicle, clipped a trailer, and no one got hurt. But to respond to that, to help them, and to look in their eyes and see the fear, that's why we're here, is to assuage that as much as we possibly can. They were scared to death. I don't know how long they've been here. I don't even remember their names, but I'll never forget their faces. And we're here to work together, develop proper plans at EOC, communication. I've been to many major incidents like this, and communications is always one of the most significant challenges before and after. We did manage, after things settled, not really settled, but progressed, we had the opportunity to bring in close to 100 other CHP officers from throughout the state, which is one of the benefits we have being a statewide organization, is we can call folks in, and in turn we respond to help them in their time of need. It was good to see. We were hopefully able to curtail some of the looting, get folks moved. It broke down out of the traffic flow, out of the roadway, so people can leave as safely as possible. But yeah, to reiterate also what Councilman Buckland said I've been in many EOCs and very impressed with our folks at Yuba City. There at Station 4. Everyone, department heads were in there just taking care of business, working with their team, and everyone has this underlying, the undertow of stress. Is the dam going to break? Is my family okay? Or friends okay? All these things working, but yet they came together for the benefit of our city. And I guarantee no one wants to withhold any information from anybody, but we do want to do the best we can to provide the most accurate and up-to-date information possible. However, given the situation, things change so much. It's difficult to know what's right, what's wrong. And then you compound that with the social media, big frustration. I don't know how many phone calls I took personally of folks. They will, from people don't even live in California. They heard this or heard that, and I don't know who this supposed person who works at the dam, I don't even know who they work for, what they're doing, but everybody knows somebody who worked at the dam who says it's about to crack in half any second. Apparently, you guys know I don't know who that person is, but I would love to choke them out right now. Because we just want to get people out of here safely and orderly. We have hours here. And just take a deep breath and go have your plan in place. Get on the FEMA website. There's all these lists of things that you can pre-pack. If you have time, like I did, I said, put all the photo albums up on the top shelf in the closets for things like that aren't really life protecting. But if you have a little bit of time, and you do, think about that and have that plan in place. And don't worry about what label folks put on the evacuation. Mandatory, voluntary. If you are uncomfortable with yourself, leave. Go out of town. Keep your eye on the internet. Keep your eye on the reputable sources, and go from there. I also think, based on communication, I think there's an opportunity here to use this as an example to show some support to reinitiate a conversation for a consolidated dispatch center regionally. I think we have some benefit to that. It's important to try to funnel information out from one source. We also have personalities. They want to be the person that breaks the news first, even if they got to make it up. And that's really frustrating for those of us on this side. We're trying to work through this. So I think I'm not really sure the details on how to make that happen, but I think that would be an opportunity if we have a center like that, whether it's by county or just this county, where we have an EOC built into that place, and we have that information coming and going from one reliable, trained, informed source. I think would be very, very good for folks. And that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, along with all the comments, I agree with each and every one of them. As far as just nomenclature, when we talk about the different names that this evacuation was given, advisory, mandatory, strongly recommended, whatever you want to call it, I know as a parent, as a daughter, taking care of my family, you hear the words evacuate, do what is best for you and your family. First and foremost, get yourself to safety and know that you are doing the best you can at the time. This information that we received was literally immediate. I think it was about 4:30 on Sunday afternoon. All of a sudden, my phone was ringing off the hook. I was getting text messages like you wouldn't believe. And then I got knocks on the door. And I'm sitting there, I'm not kidding, it's Sunday jammy day. And I had to literally jump to see what was happening. So the information was coming rapidly and it came immediate. There was no warning for us other than, get out. And with the angst that was happening and everybody trying to get their families to a safe place and wondering what's happening, we're being asked what's going on, and we don't have the information yet. And that social media was just sending out information that was really adding to that angst, that anxiety, the uncomfortable feeling, what's happening, and so forth. I remember it took me, a mere 5 miles from my home to get to the EOC, an hour and a half. And in that mist, road rage is not going to help. You know, crossing and sitting in intersections and not letting each other go through as a light is changing is not going to help. I know everybody's nervous and everybody's anxious, as I was as well. But when it's a green light and you're blocking intersections, you know, the rules to the streets do not change. I literally had to put the windows down and put my hand out so that I can 20 minutes later try to cross an intersection. Those things add, and it causes people to even become more anxious about not being able to get where they need to get. I had I'm going to say gentleman in a big truck that gets on. I am trying to do the same thing as everybody else, comes to the shoulder on the street, almost knocks over my rear view mirror. My windows are still down. His window is down. He starts yelling profanity at me. So I know there's a lot of angst, but these things do not help in addition to the social media. We are trying very hard, and no matter what we say, I know this probably doesn't bring anybody comfort, but I have to say, through all of it and the last minute information that we're getting, and we're trying to keep the community updated as quick and possibly with the right information. We're not keeping information away from you. We want you as the community, as your families, our own families, to be safe. That was the number one priority, no matter how you look at it, no matter how many rumors are here. Our number one responsibility and the number one thing in the forefront of our minds is get you to safety and make sure you have the information to ensure the safety of your families. That was first and foremost. With that being said, I have to kudos to everyone, all city, county staff, every single person in this community, no matter how much anxiety there was. You know what? You did the right thing that was right for your family. Getting through that traffic, getting to a safe place. We as a community did come together. We provided shelter for those who needed it. We provided food for those who needed it. There were kids that were at these shelters with no shoes. We got them shoes. These are important. Our community, no matter what the stress that we were put through, we did come together, and we will continue to do that. We have things that we need to re-examine. How many of us since 1997 or even prior to that have ever looked at an evacuation plan? How many of us in our own, taking ownership in our own homes, in a situation like this, do we know what we would do? You know, do we have an overnight bag already packed in the event of an emergency? Those are all things that we need to ask ourselves, not only as a community, but let's be prepared for the next time. This is time to re-examine. One of my thoughts here is, because this was a regional event, is that we should probably have a lesson learned form where the community can provide us feedback. You're the eyes and ears out there so that we can hear what was happening while we were at the EOC and doing what we needed to do. As Councilmember Harris indicated, you know, he's wearing two hats at this time. Or, you know, Councilmember Cardoza's helping in Yuba County, as we're doing what we need to do, but you were the eyes and ears. So I think in a way to re-examine what has happened and how to update our emergency plan. You know, we have a 4-way freeway this time, where in 1997, not the case. Social media, same thing. How are we going to intervene with these things? And possibly your feedback may be very critical to helping us put an updated emergency plan out there. And this time making sure that everybody has it, having it, even though it's available, but not everybody knows about it. So let's make a thorough re-examination of what has happened, but let's come together as a region and do this. And I hope that we will do that in the very, very near future, while this is very fresh, to say the least. So that's my take on it. So with that said, we'll go back around and do our council reports with our boards and commissions. I guess we'll.
Am I up
round it
first?
back.
All right.
You're first on that list.
I promise not to take the 30 minutes I just took. Attended the Sabufka meeting, which is Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency meeting. And this was just a matter of a few days before the, so we've actually have had two, one meeting after the incident, which some of the funding was authorized to be able to move forward with repairs down at Laurel and other locations on the southern reaches that needed to have some preventative work done to them. But certainly, Councilman Cardoza and I were both at both of these meetings that were informative. Nothing more really was put out than what Mike put out earlier to the entire group here. But we were looking at different scenarios and certainly wanting to make sure that the levees were protected and what the stress loads may do to the levee systems, and certainly to get moving with some preventative work. And then second, the evacuation, I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more, but went to the Sacramento Council of Governments meeting on last Thursday, and a couple things came out of that. First, the Appeal Democrat, a certain writer of a small article in the Appeal Democrat, Harold Kruger, had written something about SACOG and a Caltrans audit and all this money that SACOG had misspent or not used the proper forms or whatever. Yeah, it was up in the $2 million range. That the audit took 4 years for it to determine. But we have an agreement with Caltrans. The repayment is less than $30,000, and it's going to be coming out of advanced funding for future programs through Caltrans. So there won't be any immediate funds leaving SACOG to reestablish that monetary loss that they determined through their audit. So that'll be taken care of. And also got an update on some criteria for transportation grant through SACOG. So we look forward to being able to possibly look at that for some of our needs here related to transportation. With that, I also addressed the 31 member board and asked for some consideration for grant funding using SACOG staff and so forth to deal with our the emergency that we had here. And I just want to also say that we received so much support from various locations like Grass Valley, Nevada City, Woodland, the County of Yellow, Sutter County itself, the city or the community of Sutter, heavily impacted by what happened in moving to higher ground. Colusa, Sacramento, and Vacaville. Within minutes of this incident occurring, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I wasn't going to answer it for fear that it was some crazy relative from the East Coast asking me how I might be. And it turned out to be Mayor Steinberg from Sacramento. And he offered any assistance he possibly could to help us through what we were going to be facing for the next couple days. But what I've asked the SACOG board to look at is that we start looking at regional planning for emergency response. It's needed. It's not just needed for Yuba City. It's not just needed for Marysville, but it's needed also downstream, Sacramento, West Sacramento, Woodland, Folsom. All of the participating agencies in SACOG could certainly use a portion of this. The reason I say this is SACOG has very robust GIS mapping systems that are available. These mapping systems have elevations, all kinds of land use planning components to them, but also we have staff down there that can help with this. But dealing with natural disasters, I don't care if it's a flood, earthquake, fire in different jurisdictions, that we would be able to have a component for addressing scenarios that would be a dynamic opportunity where the mapping would be updated on any given scenario. I'll use the potential flooding where you have inundation maps. Those would be the base criteria. But once you had water reaching certain locations, that criteria would change given the dynamic that was occurring at the very same time. That could be used by local and state EOCs. It would also help in dealing with and evaluating egress from our communities. One of the things that I was unaware of, but certainly our retirees from Caltrans probably are well aware of it, but all of our state highways, to include 20, but it's not just freeway, it's any state highway, has flow meters on it. Even if the flow meter is running in the opposite direction, the data that it's picking up individualizes a specific car, and it can tell you how long it's going to take that vehicle to arrive, let's say at the next given location down the road, based on what the compaction, the speeds, and everything else that are going on. So it identifies these and would be useful in knowing how to better move vehicles and utilizing the resources that the Highway Patrol could offer. But it would also have flood depths that, again, it would allow for some dynamic data. And again, we talked about down there how Facebook drove some of the chaotic response that had happened. Much of what I said earlier was also addressed, but I think that this would be a valuable asset, not only to our community, but to all the communities in the region. It could be shared with others, but once the modeling is built, it certainly could be useful to everyone. We have unanimous support at SACOG to look for federal funding through the Department of Homeland Security to be able to secure a system that they will help us build for the future. So we're looking forward to those opportunities that came out of that. And the last meeting that I had was with both Councilmember Cardoza and I attended the homeless, the regional homeless meeting today, and we're moving forward with the basic construct of a JPA or some formation of all of the entities becoming involved in this regional homeless issue to be able to impact it and direct resources too. So we're looking forward to what transpires over the next about 3 to 4 months as that is developed. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Councilmember Cardoza.
Okay, on meetings, John already mentioned 2 of them. I attended also a couple others, the school district liaison, get it right. Liaison, thank you, meeting with Vice Mayor Parite, and also the Yuba City Transit Authority meeting. We also, Vice Mayor Parite and I attended. I'll let her go ahead and do that when she was up. For community events, we had another fun couple of weeks. I attended Cassidy Esperanza 40th Anniversary Gala. That was a wonderful event, great time. The 2nd Annual Historical Fair for the City of Marysville. They had a ceremony on the corner of 5th and D underneath the arch, introducing all the famous people that made Marysville famous, that made Marysville the town that it is. And if it wasn't for Marysville, Yuba City wouldn't be here today. And there was also a parade. It was a very brisk morning. Councilman Bill Simmons was nice enough. I got to ride with him, so it was a little warm in the vehicle. Also, I hope I don't butcher this. This was with the Yuba City Arts Gallery and the Burroughs Theater. I attended. It's the Duo de Lero. It's a flamenco guitarist concert. 2 Latin gentlemen came over and gave a a great concert. It was a fun afternoon, and then later that day, that's when everything broke loose. So, other than that, it's been a fun couple of weeks, and everybody have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris.
I can say the one of the commission I had the BO liaison project. I had to cancel that because of the things to do with the flood and then all the preparation. I didn't. Everything else was not scheduled during the last 2 weeks. Most of my waking moments have been flood, or either response or potential to flood response and preparation and mitigation, and during that entire time, of which I've already addressed. I too did go to the CASA event, which was good, the Marysville Historic Fair, and the flamenco guitar, which they're actually pretty good. I was surprised, but they did well. But as far as community events go, but again, it seems like a year ago, but it's only been a week and a half. But it's just been all emergency response related, wearing both hats for me the last week and a half to 2 weeks. So.
Okay. And then, like Councilmember Cardoza indicated, yes. With the school board government liaison, we had a lot of new members, and we did go roundtable to kind of give an idea of where we're coming from and what's going on. Darren gave a presentation on what was going on with the city. We talked also about the summer program that's coming up for the kids, and as that relates to the schools. And then Scott Mentnick was also new to the as a member, and so we were introduced to him as well. And it was a short meeting, a quick meeting. And then I also attended the Yuba City transit meeting along with Councilmember Cardoza. All of the issues on there, the main one was that the card system is going through a pilot program right now, testing out the payments on the cards and being able to swipe that at the buses as people are entering the buses, so that they don't have to carry change with them or money with them. So they can go ahead and upload these cards and be able to use them. So hopefully we'll have a report on that by the end of the year and see how that pilot program went, so that they can go ahead and expand that out. Other than that, we do have this coming Saturday, the Peace Officer Year, the Officer of the Year dinner, and that will be at the fairgrounds. In addition to that, we also have this on March 1st, so it's next Wednesday, is the next community health forum that is put together with a vast majority of us, CHP, Yuba City Police, fire, our school system, as well as our mental health, public health, and so forth. And this community health forum is going to be, the topic will be marijuana and other drugs that affect our youth development. The keynote speaker will be one of our neurologists, who will be speaking on different effects and what happens to the brain, and basically what the effects have on the brain. And we also will have the Yuba City Police Department, California Highway Patrol, also talk about statistics that we have here currently in our community, as well as other statistics from other areas that have been involved with keeping stats, as marijuana has become a recreational drug lately. So we will discuss those as well. We're looking forward to that, and that is again on Wednesday, March 1st. Other than that, hopefully we will take a breather, recover, re-examine, and do what we need to do to ensure safety and security of our community. Again, I want to thank everyone that was involved in helping get where we are today. All of our city, county staff, our law enforcement, our fire, National Guard who came in and stepped in, and each and every one of our community families and friends that participated and really helped make this a community effort to keep the safety and the security of our Yuba City. So thank you. With that,
The police department recovering that Purple Heart.
Yes, we have the Purple Heart recovery So thank you very much for the Yuba City Police to get that, along with the help of our citizens to locate those. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And with that, we will adjourn for tonight.